What do you make of it all? The drums of war beating and all this rubbish.
Well, I think you summarised it very well when you said marketing. It's about pretending that the government is strong, whereas in fact, I've just finished a inquiry report for the Northern Agenda. You know, what's happening in our country, Marcus, is that the North is being held back along the same issues that the South is destroying: energy, water, taxation, the basics. And the fundamental point about security is you have to have a strong economy. And the Wombats in Canberra are destroying our economy through pandering to overseas bureaucrats and selling our country out. It's treasonous. So the fundamental is that we have to have a strong economy, a strong country, and that's what we need to get back to.
All right, with the fact that the whole issue of quarantine during the pandemic, which is a federal responsibility, has been completely ballsed up and palmed off by Morrison and his mates, with the fact that that's completely been stuffed up, some of the reason for the distraction, do you think?
Possibly, quite possibly, because, these politicians in Canberra have a habit of distracting, as you just said. But the whole pandemic has not been managed well. What we've got is an absence of data that's driving the plans. And we don't have a plan, actually. We don't even have a strategy. It just seems to be lurching from one thing to the next. One message to sell every single week, different message. There's no coherent plan that's based on data. And I'll talk more about that in a few weeks' time at Senate estimates. But we need a plan for managing our economy, because that is fundamental to health. What we're doing is destroying our economy with some of the responses. I mean, people, the premiers of the states talk, and the Prime Minister talks about going and spending money in your state and travelling. How the hell can people make plans when they could fly to Western Australia, for example, and get locked down because they've got one positive test? They have to come back and spend $3,000 in quarantine. It's just capricious. It's destructive.
All right,
it doesn't consider the people.
Your mates up there in the Upper Hunter might be as unhappy as what Labor are at the moment, because, I'm sorry, Pork Barilaro is out there with his chequebook. Story this morning, and they're promising funding to a number of women's business organisations, while, there are other areas that probably should be prioritised. There's a bit more pork barrelling going on by the Berejiklian and Barilaro government. Just thought I'd give you a heads up on that, mate.
I'm not surprised, are you?
Right. Well, of course not.
Right. What these people are going around, what we have in this country is a system of having auctions every 4 years at the state level, every 3 years at the federal government level. And people don't seem to realise that these promises have to be paid for. And who's going to pay for them? The very people who are taking part in the auction, the voters. So it's a disrespectful way of running government. But it seems the people seem to fall for it quite often. So we've got to get more people aware of what's going on in government, so that people realise that these promises are just hollow and that they're wasting money quite often.
Aussie ingenuity and initiative, what's happened to it? We used to make engines and wonderful pieces of technology.
Well, you're absolutely correct, Marcus. A lot of your listeners, the older listeners, will remember names like Lister, Southern Cross, Cooper, Sundial, Buzzercott. These are just some of the names on old engines, old diesel engines that were purring and puttering along at Dolby. I went out to the Dolby show. You would have gone to shows when you were a kid.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Roy Leicester, where did you grow up?
Sydney's West, the Luddenham show, the Penrith show, they were wonderful.
Yeah, and so what we saw at Dolby, which is west of Toowoomba on the Darling Downs, beautiful Darling Downs, it's definitely a rural town, and we saw one whole field dedicated to more than 400 engines, old engines, had to be more than 30 years old. Okay. Some of them were 100 years old. They were puttering along, and they set a record for having the most engines running concurrently in a small area. So could you imagine this? 100 metres long, 5 lines of engines, all with their enthusiasts with them, tinkering them along. And these engines, as I said, had to be more than 30 years old, but they worked across our country. They were essential in farming and industry. Yeah. Many were designed and built in Australia, highly dependable, highly reliable. Some were built under license from overseas countries. We make none of these engines now, none at all. Yet we have great people, like Jack Brabham, for example. He's the only person ever to have been an owner of a Formula One team, a designer of a car, and the driver. The only one ever. And he won 3 world championships. He'll never be repeated. We've got the talent in this country. Yeah. We've just destroyed our our capacity to be productive.
Oh, dear. All right, Malcolm, great to have you on the program, mate. We'll catch up again next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Have a good day, mate.
One Nation's Malcolm Roberts, Marcus Paul in the morning.